Hey, just a preface for this video. Katakawa, the publisher for Isekai Ojisan, keeps taking my videos down, so this one is more like an audiobook version due to that. I guess I probably used too much raw footage from the anime itself or something, because the robot is merciless with the takedowns. Anyway, sorry this video isn't going to be like the others, but I don't know if anyone cares. Onward ho! Unrequited love, hellish torment, a fight for survival, and a terminal devotion for early console gaming, the characteristics of a battle-hardened otherworldly traveler flung forth from their native world and subject to a tempestuous alien one. Today, I bring you Uncle from Another World, an anime which contains just that. It took me 3 days to write that intro. Anyway, come on and slam, and welcome to Japan. We got pedestrians, we got crosswalks, we got big vehicles who don't look where they're going. This guy visits his uncle, who, 17 years ago, was struck by Truck-kun and entered a coma, and now has awoken. They exchange eye contact. The uncle decides to lighten the mood by speaking gibberish. There's an awkward silence, but he recovers by speaking Japanese, apologizing for being incomprehensible, and explains that he just returned from Gran Bahamal. This is the response. He flirts with a nurse in Gran Bahamalese and receives an armpit ornament. Back to business. The young'un is named Takafumi, who is the only remnant of their broken family, which collapsed after Oji-san's lengthy moratorium. Oji scribbles this down in a notebook quickly, adds a mark, then recites a wizardly incantation. Back to business for real now. Our protagonist must prove that he was trapped in another world for 17 years, but his spells do not take effect. Takafumi is exasperated and begins to explain the hard reality of working part-time in a collapsing economy. The magic happens though. He is shook. Seems like Japanese is what works here. Takafumi instantly conjures fantastical images, then tears up some important-looking papers. Oji-san continues to bewilder his nephew, but seems mostly interested in the console wars of the mid-90s. Takafumi relays the current situation. Oji-san's beloved SEGA was bitterly defeated, and so the notebook ritual is conducted once more. Takafumi inquires about this Icarus Kuara spell, which is revealed to erase memories, particularly ones that are unbearable. Oji-san offers up his book to be assessed an example. This kills the man. Takafumi begs for his memory to be undone, and so the story begins, with the nephew attempting to make money off of his otherworldly uncle's wizard powers. Later, at HQ, Oji-san finds that 17 years has birthed the innovation and change of many aspects of everyday living, then expresses his admiration for his nephew, who has managed to socialize some. Takafumi asks about his uncle's comrades from the other world, but he basically just played solo. Takafumi is a little disappointed, but later, Oji-san rambles about Gran Bahamal. Apparently, the denizens of that world are very attractive. By comparison, Oji-san figures he must have looked grotesque since they hunted him down as an orc variant. This news is almost too much for the young Takafumi to hear, but Oji-san continues to speak of the constant harassment, specifically mentioning a woman he saved who exhibited some extremely tsundere characteristics. Unfortunately for Uncle, the concept of tsundere hadn't existed until recently. Takafumi realizes this and perishes internally. Oji-san's life never went well in the other world, but now he's back and making terrible videos on the internet. He scrolls through the comments, who tear his beautiful creation to shreds. The pressure is almost too much to bear, as the internet slang causes Oji-san to crumble. He wants to purchase this cool new phone, but it can only use 2G and can't make calls. However, one who chooses the SEGA console cannot live an ordinary life, which is enough reason, I suppose. They discuss the numerous features of smartphones while browsing the market. The talk of technological innovation reminds Oji-san that he made revolutionary strides in his other world. He figures that just showing Takafumi would be easier than explaining, and uses a variation of the memory spell to project his memories directly. Oji-san utilized rectangle magic to science together an infinite wellspring of water for a drought-stricken village. They didn't appreciate this, attempted to hang him, and smashed the magic water vase to pieces. The tsundere girl came to rescue Oji-san though. Wait, he got himself out. Takafumi is upset by this. Oji-san notices and offers a different camera angle to cheer him up, which gives Takafumi the idea to to see what the girl was up to. She tsundere super hard. Takafumi is in awe of her kindness and beauty, while Oji-san reflects on being insulted constantly. Suddenly, the auction for Oji-san's cool phone is about to end. In a blind panic, he places a bid, only to find out that the shipping cost is 125% of the price of the phone. There is only one option which remains. They must pick it up in person. And so Oji-san jumps out the window to do just that. A few minutes later, phone is acquired, and Takafumi has manifested a cunning plan to save money on purchases. Later, to open a freshly delivered package of rice, Oji-san offers a cutting tool for Takafumi to use. It's a legendary grade weapon of mass destruction, taken from his dimensional storage, of which he carries around many such items. Of course, as one might do, he attempted to sell a few pieces, but was only offered pennies from the local pawn shop. Takafumi asks whether these rings were meant as gifts, but Oji-san obtained them passively through dungeons. There is a pause. Oji-san figures that his nephew wishes to talk about relationships, and offers his 30 years of experience on the subject. His first love, all the way back in grade school, Sonic and Tails. Isega nerds out in his memories. It's actually extremely depressing. Takafumi reflects on this, then asks about girls in the other world, and so Oji-san shows him saving a gaggle of innocent civilians from a vicious-looking pigman. They are grateful, or not. It seems they are even more afraid for their lives now. The woman melancholically accepts her subservience in exchange for the little ones' lives, presumably. Takafumi is exasperated. Oji-san reflects on how afterwards he was knocked unconscious and tossed off a cliff somehow. Takafumi sees something he shouldn't have. Then Oji-san rambles about how she saved him after his fall. It is Elf, who tsunderes harder than ever before. Oji-san doesn't want to be indebted to her, so he presents her with a legendary Cosmite ring, one of 7 in existence. He goes ahead and forces it on her, not understanding the situation at all. Takafumi is fully aware, however. He attempts to subtly hint that his uncle just got married, but Ji-san accompanied his elf babe to a local pawn shop to exchange the ring for money, and so she followed him around ever since. They stow away the items and come up with a new video idea. It's rainy. Our boys are struggling to increase their YouTube views and discuss business as a result. Oji-san reveals his latest package, a magazine revealing the content of a mid-90s Reader's Choice SEGA games ranking, the contents of which perhaps helped maintain his desire to live through the hardships thrown at him in the other world. Takafumi doesn't care. There is suspense. Oji-san reads the result. It isn't what he expected, but he plays it cool. I guess it actually isn't okay, and Oji-san dramatically moistens in the rain. He creates a localized thunderstorm while expressing his true feelings. Takafumi watches on in bewilderment. Later, they discuss RPG games, which reminds Oji-san of a circumstance from the other world. After defeating a village elder in Mortal Kombat, he was tasked with rousing a local bum whose family has looked after a special freezing sword with the power to slay the blaze dragon who has been giving them trouble recently. Here she is, Mabel, not the dragon, who is too depressed to leave her igloo. She wants to view a specific flower blossom, which is when Oji-san decided to head straight to the Shrine of Flame to slay the blaze dragon. Takafumi is furious at his efficiency. Later, he returned victorious to the Frosty Cave and village elder, who was thankful but conflicted. Suddenly, a package. Sega Saturn, and some games. It was meant as a surprise, but Tepes Fumes is hesitant due to their monetary constraints. Oji-san is given the gift of life. He makes the face of surprise. The Saturn came with the Guardian Heroes. Oji-san couldn't be more elated, and they play. It's New Year's Eve in Japan. However, the vibes in Gran Bahamal are different on New Year's. Takafumi is limitlessly curious. When they get home, Oji-san shows him the otherworldly festival, fraught with merriment. Oji-san, by contrast, stayed far away from it all and went to bed early. Takafumi is limitlessly disappointed. There is tension, and more tension. They decide to do some gaming instead. Oji-san remembers that Mabel actually showed up at some point, and Takafumi's with rage. And so the story continues. Mabel wants to be strong like Oji-san, and requests advice on combating cowardice. He tells her to live how she wants, which was pretty inspiring for her. Takafumi reflects on his uncle's steely cold MC vibes. However, in the memory, he activates Mabel's sinister Hikikomori side with his Sega wisdom. She went on to offer him her sword, which Oji-san declined, and that was it. Takafumi goes to make noodles. They discuss the ending and cancellations of various shows which used to air 17 years ago. While partaking in the soba, sometime in the new year, a girl named Fujimiya encounters Oji-san being a schizophrenic in the park and decides to never walk this way again, then runs into Takafumi. They know each other. It's been a while, but they catch up briefly. Takafumi invites invites her to his place to hang out some more, and so Fiji shows up, gets the go-ahead to enter, then walks around. She finds his sus hair as Oji-san emerges from the balcony. There is tension. He begins to cast his wizard spells on the intruder and makes a break for her to erase her memories. Takafumi interrupts, but Oji-san is tenacious, especially so. But she is a friend. All is well, more or less. She gets the gist of the situation, which she finds particularly insane. They refuse to display Ji-san's magic for free, which makes sense professionally, but causes Jumbiba to express concern over Takafumi's finances. Oji-san blurts out that she must like the boy. It's so true. But Takafumi has inherited Oji-san's neutron star-like density, and the conversation drifts towards Evangelion instead. If Oji-san is familiar with that, then he might catch up with the concept of tsundere shortly. Takabaka fears this result. A moment later, he reveals plainly that he has absolutely no potential for finding that ending, which Takafumi reflects on. Fujimiya moves the conversation along, but Oji-san sticks to the topic of true love by uttering the hushed name Kaid Nanase, then monologues about her tragic story with a single tear escaping from beneath his glasses. Fuji is inspired, but Takafumi understands that his uncle's wisdom is sourced only from SEGA and tells her. She is shook, goes to scold him, but in a flash is teleported behind and gets her mind read. The truth of her visit is laid bare. Takafumi is too dense to understand though. Suddenly, a package arrives and Oji-san goes to investigate. Fujimiya trails him with fury, inquiring on his identity. Oji-san responds by stating he's an uncle, back from another, but there is a package. Fuji takes the opportunity to tell Taka to get out of here, insisting that she can help him escape monetarily. This only causes Takafumi to invite her to be a roommate. She is shook. The package is 50 pounds of rice, which causes the delivery boy and Fujimiya to steam aggressively. Takafumi returns home one day to find an elf fondling Fujert. Sometime in the past, Uncle is delighted with Fujimiya's presence when they are presented with the 2018 changes in the YouTube partnership program, meaning that Oji-san was no longer eligible for monetization. It is a dark day. Oji-san's got more subos than I do, but still needs a couple hundred more to get that advertising cash flow. He seems to have trouble adapting to internet etiquette and governs his comment section with an iron fist. Takafumi intervenes, but the situation remains the same, reminding Oji-san of the time when the sealed city, Luvaldrum, was besieged by 1,000 legendary beasts. Takafumi is infinitely interested, and they get to the viewing. Oji-san ponders the reason for erecting such a large barrier, when his elven mega babe shows up to insult him for looking like an orc. This causes unnecessary attention from the civilians, but all is repaired. She follows Oji-san through the city, questioning why he doesn't hide his face, pestering him about the origination of this large fruit, and educating him about the importance of a barrier of this size, protecting Lavaldrum from powerful monsters. Oji-san doesn't pay attention, and absolutely obliterates the ancient shield just to see if he could do it. Takafumi is exasperated. The beasts arrive, Attack on Titan style. The reference is uncanny. There is also a dragon. The plebs are shook, but Elf and Oji-san find a vantage point to prepare for a counterattack. Mass casualties cannot be prevented with so many monsters, but Elf readies her epic sci-fi fantasy blade, primed to engage in heroism. She calls Oji-san an awkward baka, tells him to run, then gallantly propels herself towards the hellish onslaught, and straight into a barrier that Oji-san asked the spirits to put up. The day was saved, as the plebs mutter in joint confusion. Elf shows up to give them some reassurance, and goes to check on Orcface, who questions why she didn't snitch on him. She asks for dinner as payment, but to prevent immediate extortion, Oji-san fled the city. The moral of his anecdote reveals itself in the form of simply asking for what you want. In this case, it would be subscribers, so Oji-san does just that. Takafumi doubts the efficacy of this tactic, but it's a proven strategy for gaining subscribers. It actually works. He is shook. Fuji shows up to find them in the middle of this conflict and attempts to convince Oji-san that YouTube is not an actual job. She fails miserably after accidentally carrying the conversation back to her potentially becoming a roommate. Takafumi isn't so sure about having two dudes share a room and pieces out to do some shopping. Oji-san empathizes with Fujimiya's lack of riz and offers his assistance. This means less than nothing to her though. Oji-san is shook and goes to sulk. She kind of regrets being rough and goes goes to talk, finding Ojisan has metamorphosed into Oba-san. Fuji hasn't witnessed Ojisan's magic yet, and isn't able to evaluate the situation. Ojisan covers for himself, using wind magic to recreate his man voice, then goes to immediately do girl talk with Fuji, who is experiencing boundless confusion. And here we are, back around full circle. There is tension, followed by suspense. Elf insists she isn't Oji-san, until Takafumi mentions Sonic and Tails, which swiftly reveals his aunt's true form, stating that transformation magic is forbidden unless absolutely necessary, which means he determined that girl talk was essential. Takafumi, an avid opportunist, snatches a chance to acquire additional YouTube views by tricking Oji-san into playing Guardian Heroes as a hot woman. Fujimiya has progressed beyond boundless confusion and has entered the dimensional plane of bamboozlement. They get set up, but the girl talk with Fuji must come first. Oji-san opens her memories to observe why Takafumi only sees her as a friend. Fujil still hasn't come to accept the existence of magic, but they continue. Here she is, being a crass bully. Fujimiya has a shocking revelation. Their bittersweet childhood memories were not exactly as she remembers, but Takafumi doesn't seem to mind. He recognized her in the streets because he saw the same girl who protected him. Despite outward appearances, Oji-san reflects on the Shrek plotline, starting to connect the dots between his relationship with Oba-san Elf, but ultimately figures that the transfiguration magic is beginning to have an effect on him and dismisses the thought. The latest video has commenced the public viewing. It's VTuber Elf Oji-san playing Guardian Heroes in a sexy woman's body. There is no gameplay footage. Oji-san is shocked to see his video reach 200,000 views, but Takafumi celebrates. Oji-san reads a single comment, "No need for a console," and metamorphoses back into his true self, devoid of his pride as a YouTuber. Fujimiya is shook. Later, they partake in a lavish sashimi dinner with the success money. Takafumi is bullied by the local punks for reading fantasy light novels like a nerd. Unfortunately for the aggressors, Fujimiya is the bigger fish in this pond and eats them alive. Takafumi is elated by this result, impressed with Fuji's heroism. Back in the present, the same rings true. Fuji mitochondria responds by whipping out a middle school picture of her and Takafumi to prove that she evolved into a woman. Oji-san furiously takes a million pictures, excited to capture the visage of his nephew as a youth. Fuji attempts to streamline efficiency by suggesting email or text instead, but Oji-san's phone simply doesn't do that. Instead, he was considering his primary method of long-distance communication be smoke signals or flags. Anyway, the coffee is superb. Oji-san purchased a coffee maker for Taka's 20th birthday gift, which causes Fiji to ideate on gifts as well, deciding rather quickly to send him a lascivious middle school picture, of which Takafumi decides to instantly delete due to social concerns. Ah, a sale of coffee beans. Time to hastily flee. Her seduction technique lost to a sale advertisement for coffee beans. In a fit of rage, Fujimiya slaps a table, causing Oji-san's scalding coffee to buckle under her sheer power. As a result, Oji-san quickly unleashes a blast of frost magic to prevent injury. Injury was not prevented exactly, however, and after some brief defrosting, the moistened Fujert must now take a shower. Oji-san fled the house temporarily from guilt and set her up with some of Takafumi's clothes. She equips his stuff, pondering the romanticism of it. Suddenly, Takafumarino returns home and infiltrates the shower, expecting to find Oji-san. There is an infinite amount of sexual tension, and Takafumi skedaddles with a fervent apology. Fujimiya contemplates the situation and decides now is the time. She steals herself and enters his goon cave, finding him attempting to cast Icarus Kuara to purge the primal feeling of lust. He apologizes for being an accidental pervlord, but Fuji is cool with it. She even neglected to put on pants, homie. Taka cries a tear of regret as he states plainly that he will take responsibility. The emergency flag has been set, and Oji-san arrives to engage with the danger in response. Takafumi relays the situation and insists that his memory be erased. Fujimiya doesn't want this, however, but Takafumi has inherited the family's resilient antinatalistic genetics. He reflects on how blessed he is to have such a caring friend. Sometime later, Fujimipo has turned 20 as well, and Oji-san wishes to bequeath a gift, the wisdom of his personal philosophy. A pinch is a chance. The youngins are shook at his sudden prudence, as he explains that when faced with great adversity, simply changing your focus can turn things around. They are both thankful for the advice, and as an additional gift, Oji-san shows them the first time he drank alcohol. He hasn't aged since then, which the Takafuji reflect on briefly. Elf is wearing a sheer dress, which understandably attracts attention. Fujimiya Fujimiya is informed about the tsundere elf stalker. Back in the memory, Elf questions Oji-san about his abrupt recreation of a god-level barrier and receives a meatball as a bribe to not snitch on him for shattering the first one. She skips over the misunderstanding, asking how Orcface got to be so strong, reflecting on when they first met. Memory Inception sequence activate. He exploded a massive worm, saving Elf from certain death. Apparently, this was the legendary Venom Dragon, which Oji-san didn't even know about. Elf berates him for this, but lets it go after Orcface states that he just wanted to save her. She tsunderes the question of whether he does this to seduce other women too, of which he unveils that he slew the Blaze Dragon, and Mabel was rather thankful afterward. Elf is shook. The Blaze Dragon can only be defeated with a frozen blade, but Orcface somehow did it without. He reveals that after challenging it several times and observing its moves, the dragon was able to be slain with a regular sword. Elf is belligerent, but Oji-san counters by stating plainly that the people of this world simply gave up from the start, and confiding his motto upon her, "A pinch is a chance," a saying which came from Puyo Puyo's strategy book. Fujifumi is exasperated, and Oji-san goes to fulfill his hankering to play Puyo Puyo. The memory continues on, as Orcface offers to take Elf back to his place. She sunderes, but he pulls her along with Maximum Giga Chad Riz. Oji-san attempts to get them to play, but is quickly bribed into leaving the room with a single-player game. Orcface stumbles along with Elf by his side, stating that he's glad she's here for when things get rough. There is sexual tension. Before making it to the room, Elf exclaims that she has no choice but to help him forever. It's all good now though, because Oji-san was just too drunk to navigate back to the inn. This kills the elf and the kids. Oji-san barges in to skip till morning, where Elf greets him, face still red from a night of crying. Oji-san doesn't notice, but Fujimiya felt that with her entire soul essence and pounds one down. Takafumi dies, and Oji-san consumes a fifth of a hard lemonade. This immediately cripples him, and Fuji begins to leave. Takafumi wants her to take responsibility, but she doesn't have another option otherwise. Oji-san wishes to use his magic to take her home, and ends up with the three of them spiraling through the sky. It's clear at this point that Oji-san can't hold his liquor. In the after credits, in some dungeon, Elf gets the poison sensually sucked out of her ear, but it was an aphrodisiac or something. Oji-san doesn't understand at all, and only makes her more aroused. She apologizes and incapacitates Orcface with a sharp knee to the face, after which she uses her magical headband to disable viewing of memories before definitely being Oji-san. Fujimiya asks Oji-san for some poison for Takafumi, but is misunderstood, and that's the end of part 1 of Uncle from Another World. Fujimiya attempts to suggest that Oji-san become a baseball player, stating that he could cheat using his magic. Ji-san is an honorable man who understands the hard work put in by professionals, and does not wish to drag their dedication through the mud with his wizardly powers. This is understandable. The planet is moistened, and the discussion of baseball reminds Oji-san of the time he was nearly assassinated. The youths are startled, but he continues. Late one night, in a forest, Oji-san was approached by a familiar hooded figure, which Takafumi points out. It's Mabel, whose chilly sword has become a scythe to reap a frigid vengeance. She pounces upon Ojirino-san, but doesn't seem overly keen to actually kill him. Oji-san recognizes Maple and figures she just wants to talk, and so she does, revealing that her lifelong duty to protect the frozen sword was undone, and her existence is now meaningless. I assume the village kicked her out for being a bum. Oji-san doesn't pick up on her sarcasm, and yells back at her, much to the youngin's sudden overwhelming distress. Myrtle readies her blade, farming tool, sharp thing, and prepares to strike. However, Oji-san doesn't feel killing intent from those crazed orbs, and asks if she is eating well. Mabel most definitely isn't, and has a mental breakdown before passing out, and so Oji-san drags her to a nearby inn and gives her a tasty loaf. They discuss her living situation, which was pretty much exactly as I said earlier, except the mayor wanted to enslave Mabel. Takafuji Mifumi reflects on this. Mabel ultimately decided to torment the villagers with water torture, which makes sense. Oji-san is impressed with her tenacity to individually torture 108 villagers, but Mabel definitely can't go home now, and clearly doesn't want to work in such harsh conditions, as displayed here. Oji-san relates, then states that he's able to support himself as an adventurer. It's a decent paying gig which allows him to work on finding a way back to his world. Marble is impressed, giving Oji-san the go-ahead to brag about beating Alien Soldier in 30 minutes. This confuses her, but this other world he speaks of sparks her curiosity. She is interrupted by Uncle suggesting that she use the God freezing sword to make cash. Mabel isn't so sure about abusing the power of her family's sword, but Oji-san gives her the same advice as before. It's her life, and she should be able to do what she wants. She is inspired twice over, and figures that finding a way to break the seal of ice would be a good start. The flower blossom she requested previously didn't do anything to aid that, so her next bet would be to fix her gloomy personality. Oji-san compliments her introvertedness, which helped cracks the seal a little. Mabel tries to cling to her darkness, but Oji-san compliments her further. The sword is fixin' to bust out. Our boy went and did it again. He now has acquired a second wife, whom he forced into marriage while she slept. Here's the reaction shot. Table trips over a few words, then attempts to reject Oji-san as her sword turns into a puddle. Oji-san insists that he help her with finances, and their divorce was short-lived. Mabel is incapable of comprehending this circumstance, while Oji-san keeps insisting that she accept his gift. Anyway, it's getting late, so she may as well stay the night. Despite there being a small, singular bed, Babel seems to have at least come to terms with the situation, and requests that she have some time to bathe. She's aggressively smelled up by Oji-san, who finds no wrong, but suggests that she sell the ring first to avoid the bathing fee. This statement completely remakes the seal of ice in an atomic nanosecond, causing Mabel to go feral with primal rage. Oji-san senses the urge to kill and springs into action. The clappering summons Elf, who is eager to just see him, but brings a pillow just in case. Well, I guess, he had to restrain Mabel. This doesn't look so good. Oji-san tries to get Elf to help, but she spots the glimmering of a cosmolite ring. Oji-san begs to be spared as Elf slices through his magical piss chains. He dies. The ladies exchange knowing looks, and that's how Oji-san was almost assassinated. He gets no amnesty from the kids, but Takafumi turns the vibe around by complimenting his uncle on beating that game in 30 minutes. This causes him to ramble, while Taco Fumes looks up the current speedrun time, 12 minutes. Oji-san dies. He curses the internet, then they discuss English translations on games. The memory continues in the background as Fuji watches on. Mabel and Elf discuss Oji-san's origin and how perhaps, like Mabel's descendants, are from the same world, Japan. Fuji is shook. They all gather around to have a little rewind and witness Elf consoling Mabel about being forcefully wed to Orcface. Mabel is fine though. Elf notices that she might be a little too okay with this and asks why. Label says that Oji-san might be from Japan, then starts doing some Disney theatrics while reciting the history of her people. Her ancestor died in a samurai war, reincarnated standard Isekai style, and was given the cool sword by God. Takafumi reflects on this. Elf interrupts Mabel's monologuing by summarizing the story. Samurai fell in love, undid the frosty part of the sword, and slew the blaze dragon. Gable quivers and shook, while Elf inquires about her relationship with Orcface. Unfortunately, Mabel spent too long practicing that recitation, only to have Elf interrupt. This causes her to crumble. Elf fervently apologizes, unsure of what to do exactly. Oji-san suddenly interrupts with fury at God for not giving him a cool sword. Takafumi figures he should have got something at least, and suggests that they look back to when he was transferred. Oji-san proceeds to rewind through 18 years of mobs, lynchings, hangings, executions, etc., until eventually stumbling across the moment he emerged into existence. He didn't get to talk to God, and was harassed immediately by adventurers who he couldn't communicate with. Fuji Mio Yogurt hears a faint voice, so Oji-san cranks the volume, finding that God is speaking Korean. Oji-san couldn't hear anyway because he was being ravaged by the natives. Takafumi proceeds to do a Google Translate, finding that the pre-recorded robot God voice was asking what powers Oji-san wants. He must have been given whatever he was thinking then, which Takafumi enthusiastically ponders. Uncle just wanted to be able to talk to his aggressors and was given the gift of translation. God proceeds to tell him to go to Mount Dordo for minimum knowledge, and so Oji-san was able to speak, live another day, sold to a freak show as a rare orc with human intelligence, and totally unaware that there is a god. He costs 3 copper coins. Takafumi requests that they take a break, and so they do. Back in the memory, upon selling Oji-san for 3 pennies, the adventurers also sell off a random brush for 120 pennies. This is apparently news to Uncle and Takafumi, who received nosebleeds due to the effects of relearning a memory which was erased. Fuji learns about this and peeps in the notebook of despair. And so, Ojisan is now a member of a freak show, which exhibits exotic beasts. He skips forward a week due to being forgotten about. Ojisan suckled on a puddle to survive, and began talking to a single ray of light to remain sane. The one-sided conversation about Pulseman's Volticar move navigates towards a comparison to the beauty of the ray of moonlight, which is thankful for the compliment. The spirit of light, Kilgid, bequeathed upon Ojisan the ancient magical words to harness its power, and so Uncle acquired a sword of light, which he used to escape. Tarkov reflects on the previous memories where Ojisan communed with the spirits to accomplish stuff. It never occurred to Oji that his magic was of a spiritual nature, because he just assumed that it was an autodidactic acquisition of knowledge from his honed adaptability from video games. The circus animals all noticed a chance to escape, guilt-tripping Ojisan into beginning a rebellion. His animal friends were actually vicious beasts, and once set free, decided to eviscerate any human they saw, including Ojisan. In a SEGA-focused panic, Ojisan obliterates his assailants, rescues his former master, and faces off against the overwhelming army of ferocious animals till dawn, after which he enjoyed a lavish feast of various exotic monsters, sending them gracefully into the afterlife. This scene causes Ojisan to wistfully reminisce about his excellent start. The youths are shook. His only complaint is that he was sold for less than a used brush. Fuji begins to peace out in light of the fried chicken waiting at home, but Ojisan accidentally lures them back into the memories with the meeting of Elf. No fried chicken for Fujert, but the battle with the Venom Dragon proceeds, and it's over. Fujimiya laments her lack of chicken, but Takafumi remains impressed at his uncle's prowess. He reassures his nephew that it was luck which saved the day, as Elf had already injured the dragon enough to reveal a weak point that Ojisan exploited. Elf is shook, mistaking him for an orc, but he gives her his jacket to cover up and insists that he is human. She gives him her gratitude, then draws a dagger, prepared to slay the grotesque demon before her. She regains composure, apologizes, then sheathes her blade. Unfortunately, Ojisan had never seen dimensional storage and assumed that she had stabbed herself. He goes to investigate, completely disregarding that Elf is totally nude. She resists, but Ojisan is persistent. He finds no sign of injury and only backs off after being attacked. Elf unleashes a barrage of insults aimed at his visage, calling him a perverted orc and beginning to sunderay. Unsure of what to do, Ojisan decides the best option is to stay silent and endure the berating. So that's when Elf's pestering began. Speaking of which, back to the assassination attempt. The morning after being frozen in ice, he awakens to find his wife sprawled across his bed. Elf defends herself with a thinly veiled cultural excuse, but Ojisan believes her. She is elated as he figures that since it's cold, they may as well sleep in. Mabel secures the prime position, however, calling out to her mother in her sleep. She so longingly does not wish to work, reciting the tragedy of her whore mother who abandoned her to elope with some guy. Elf uses her karate to jar marbles from her nightmare, after which Mabel attempts to defend herself by stating she wishes to work, despite trembling uncontrollably. Ojisan once again suggests that she sell the ring. Elf also suggests this, but Mabel is conflicted. Ojisan puts everything else aside, assigns Libel's care to Obasan Elf, and they get breakfast. Since none of them actually know each other, they do introductions. Mabel's is self-explanatory. Elf doesn't give her name, but states that her mission is to find and gather ancient relics, and Ojisan introduces himself as Wolf Gunblood, whose main goal is to find his way back home. Despite knowing Elf for 3 years now, Ojisan figured that it would be best not to give out his real name to strangers. The kids reflect on this. Then Elf states that she is headed to the town where she sold her ring. Fiji Tacos figures that she feels threatened by Mabel and wants to purchase her wedding ring back. Wolfgun Blood decides to go investigate a nearby dungeon where a hero is said to be rummaging around. Elf reveals some rumors about a hero of legendary strength who single-handedly slayed a horde of Legion-class beasts. Mabel wants to go with Oji-san, but her otaku lifestyle will make timely travel nearly impossible, and so their fated party immediately disbanded. Fujimiya regrets not partaking in the fried chicken, but Oji-san offers that they get some ramen instead. He was a little short on money, so Fiji had to cover his tab, but they enjoyed the meal nevertheless. Elf uses her toes to pick up her hat, while Oji-san attempts to reacquire his jacket. She refuses, so Oji-san restrains her with his lascivious piss chains. Elf tricks him into undoing the shackles, and totally incapacitated him. Takafumi is exasperated by the entire situation. Oji-san never got his hoodie back, but received Elf's iconic sheer dress instead, which they both decide Fujimiya should try out. It looks good on her, but reminds Oji-san of Elf, causing him to feel a little nostalgic. Later, they come up with a cool name for Uncle's translation skill, deciding on Wild Talker. Oji-san's suggestion was lame, I guess. Suddenly, Fuji must away to do some stuff at college, leaving Takafumi rather dazed. I think she forgot her phone. Oji-san does some sick moves in a new game he purchased, which reminds him of the time when he saved a village from a horde of goblins with a team of adventurers. After thoroughly trouncing them in battle and being recognized from a previous encounter of the same ferocity, they introduce each other. The lady's companions are hesitant, but they team up anyway. The horde of goblins turns out to be an army of goblins, but Oji-san has a cunning plan and proceeds to engage his lure into pitfall strat, which doesn't work. As a fallback, the downward thrust attack from Golden Axe should do the trick, and so he proceeds to gracefully leap into the air and whiff every strike. Impressive as it is, what really did the business was the resulting panicked swipe of frustration, which felled an entire mountain, the after effects of which obliterated the goblins. Tracheotomy points out that his uncle's SEGA wisdom in fact made the situation worse, which falls on deaf ears as Oji-san fervently defends his precious knowledge. After all that, the adventurers head back to town. Oji-san doesn't want to get on their bad side and allows them to share a 4-way split on the reward. They all laugh about it while Takafumi reflects on his uncle's new friends. The cleric girl secretly mentions the Luvaldrum barrier situation, in awe of Oji-san's power, but this activates the autistic sleeper agent within him, leading to the instant erasing of all of their memories involving him. Takafumi is no longer surprised, but this isn't the last time Oji-san and this party meet. In another circumstance, after their traditional greeting and a deja vu moment, they introduce themselves again. Oji-san uses another alias, then gets down to business. An old shrine has become a lair for a monster hedgehog. Of course, Oji-san knows all about hedgehogs from his late nights with Sonic and intends to befriend it. Through sheer willpower and determination to speak amiably with Sonic, anything is possible. That's no hedgehog. Oji-san is disappointed, but he still wishes to converse, asking why the Hoge hedge has been killing humans. He connects telepathically with it, translating the beast's words. It just enjoys killing for pleasure. Oji-san unleashes a blast of violent hellfire upon the demonic creature, and that was his first time speaking with an animal. He proceeds to inquire about a hero nearby. When Fudrit's phone makes its presence known, Takis must deliver this precious lifeline to his friend immediately, and gets Oji-san to fly him to her college. They have a look, finding a suspicious scene. Some punk is harassing his girl, and Takafumi must steel himself for battle. If the man is right for her, then there is nothing to be done. But Tapir Poopy must go see for himself first. As reassurance, Oji-san hooks his nephew up with some temporary spiritual powers, then asks what will be done if things go awry. Takafumi intends to erase his opponent's memories and speeds off. The dialogue between the suspicious pairing could be easily misconstrued as harassment, and they run into Takafumi, who is neglecting to hide his aura. He recognizes the red-haired punk as Chiaki, Fuji's little brother, who struggles to remember Tako at first, then suddenly sees the resemblance. It's been a while. Somehow, Chiaki is in 4th grade, despite being a mongoloid. I guess this type of growth runs in the family. He's visiting Sumine to do some YouTube stuff. Uncle shows up just in time to talk with the little YouTuber as a professional. Their union must be a fated event, as Oji-san approaches with an introduction. He's instantly rejected as a nobody. The two tubers discuss games, but Chalky doesn't know what Sega Saturn is, so they shift to YouTube-related things. While Fujimiya confronts Takafumi about his menacing aura, he reveals his concern that Fujimeter may have acquired an unruly boyfriend. She is shook, but Takafernicus figures that it wouldn't be surprising due to her radiant cuteness. Tape Farmer was concerned about her safety and just got ahead of himself. He reveals the powers recently acquired from Oji-san by making holograms of himself and Fuji, turning invisible, then teleporting away. Fujimiya is in awe of his prowess, but Takafumi spent his childhood reading light novels and contemplating the use of magic, so he has essentially mastered it already. Later, they discuss a time in grade school when Takafumi rescued her from a pack of wild bullies, but he remembers differently. Luckily, there is an easy way to check, so they do. Looks like Fujimiya was back at it again with her freakish strength and threatening personality, but they both got the wrong idea of the situation. The actual truth is slightly more jarring than their idealistic memories. Either way, Fujimiya was flattered and begins to flirt. Suddenly, a friend of hers walks in on their intimate moment, which gives Tako the go-ahead to introduce himself and add to the securing of Funky's safety. He's a little too concerned about her safety, probably, but is scolded. The phone be ringing though, and they must return to Chiaka. Later, back home, the three discuss the activating conditions of Oji-san's ability, deciding on desperation as one of them, which begs the question of how he gained ties with the Japanese spirits. Takafumi was giving off a sinister aura with his fancy government paperwork, which led Oji-san to make an enthusiastic attempt at creating magic. Anyway, the story involving the hero isn't done yet. Uncle was asking about the location of the hero, which prompts the cleric, Alicia, to take up Sword Boy's sword and announce herself as the hero chosen by fate, the shining crusader, Alicia Edelcia. Unfortunately, Alicia doesn't understand how to properly maintain a sword, and her companion has a mental breakdown. Spiky Hair scolds her, and she apologizes, and that there is the legendary hero and her party, who have only been adventuring for about 6 months. Oji-san takes a look at their coronation ceremony to find that they repelled an army of goblins which threatened the whole kingdom. Of course, none of them remember what happened, and Oji-san begins to peace out. Alicia stops him to mention the Luvaldrum barrier incident. She manages to avoid losing her memories somehow, and they team up for a bit. Again. Their mission is to explore this insanely difficult labyrinth to fulfill their joint childhood dream of obtaining the legendary Wand of Salvation. Oji-san gets confirmation of this by forcefully projecting Albert's memories. She fawns over her diminutive simps, who aren't appreciative of this, but it's a pleasant scene. Upon entering the dungeon, Oji-san casts a series of elaborate spells, leading them directly to the exit and to the legendary wand. The team isn't exactly thrilled, and now their memories are wiped again. The process is just as dramatic. Oji-san wanted them to earn the wand properly, so they went at it again and feel fulfilled this time. Unfortunately, Uncle wasn't satisfied with his assistance in the matter and goes to wipe the slate clean once more, but after being sincerely thanked, can't bring himself to do so. The precious memories of their adventure are maintained, and Oji-san stoically disappears to the capital for some business. Not before receiving some Yu-Gi-Oh cards though, and off he goes, with a smile. Oji-san was cool as heck there. Anyway, it's kind of hot today, and they have no AC. As a result, the three reflect on when most places didn't come equipped with AC, and child abuse was rampant. Takafumi has a sudden traumatic flashback, and instinctively wishes to continue viewing Oji-san's memories. Fuji reflects on this. Orc-Face terrifies the captain of the guard with his memory spell, revealing that the church has full authority to declare heroes, and that the Pope is meeting with the general right now. Oji-san thanks him, and vanishes to go settle things with the church, for granting Alicia and her lads a title beyond their abilities. It would seem the nefarious duo are attempting to kill off the newly promoted heroes to acquire extra funds for military endeavors. Oji-san intervenes, unveiling the exact memory of when they knowingly sent the rookie adventurers to the goblin army. Oji-san delivers one of his most baller MC lines about defending the honor of the spirits of those who risked their lives and died for it. Takafumi identifies the trope of superior modern morals. However, the 20-year-old Oji-san was too young to have thought that deeply about this, and flubbed his words. Since the situation was so dire, Oji-san decided that the best option would be to use forbidden transformation magic to metamorphose into the most powerful creature he knew, Tabuchi-sensei, his middle school homeroom teacher, whose combination of impassive glare, incomprehensible gibberish, and magisterial despotic slappy hands make for an incredible, formidable being. The technique is so thoroughly effective that the general is instantly subdued. His impassioned underling goes to defend his honor, but receives the same treatment. Despite this, the general makes the counterpoint that the current military budget can no longer keep up with the increasing threats against the kingdom, citing the catastrophic events caused by Oji-san's various doings as reason for utmost caution. Even through Tabuchi-sensei's ironclad debate skills, Oji-san could not bring himself to deliver another slap. Suddenly, Maybelle shows up to do battle. With her husband, her sword is a puddle. They have an intense wizard battle, but it was actually just an ice magic illusion, and they discuss how Mabel became a knight with benefits and everything. She has an extensive ego trip, which terrifies Takamiya. Mabel attempts to get Oji-san to throw the fight to achieve a pay raise and give him a knighthood. This does not satisfy Wolf Gunblood, however. She equates their fight to a game, which makes the situation worse, then attempts to be cute to save herself. Oji-san states that she is, of course, cute, but this causes their illusions to become 240p, and in turn outs their charade. The general instantly suspects her of colluding with the Dark Orc, and and threatens her job security. Things get real readily as Mabel goes feral, lashing out at friend and foe alike. Ojisan shatters the mind control magic placed on her in a single, precise strike, outing the Pope as a pervert for going to such lengths. Uncle proceeds to inspire the general, stating that by placing faith in his soldiers, he will surely find another way to handle the monster crisis. His comrades agree, but the general has already dirtied his hands. Suddenly, the visage of Tabuchi-sensei turns the tides in his heart, and his mind is swayed. The youths ponder Tabuchi-sensei's prowess briefly. Ojisan begins to offer his help to protect the kingdom, but before he can, the general introduces himself as Ricardo. Ojisan almost comes up with a silly name, but goes with Wolfgun blood instead. The Pope isn't so sure what one freak can do without a leash, but Ojisan transforms into the second most powerful creature he knew, the legendary Blaze Dragon. Everyone is shook. Ojisan tells Ricardo to apologize to the heroes, then flutters off into the distance. Unfortunately, Marble was still fired, and for some reason, Takafumi has developed scales. Uncle figures that Takafumi's shortening of incantations the other day probably frustrated the spirits, and so, to remedy this, Ojisan joins his nephew in joint reptilian camaraderie, and that's the end of part 2 of season 1 of Isekai Ojisan. Hey? Satan has exposed his butt crack to the denizens of Japan, increasing the average temperature and causing Ojisan's console to kill itself in protest. He is sent into a panicked frenzy, but thankfully, the internet contains ample instructions to fix such delicate machinery. Fujimiya brought some fish and ice cream over to help cool the lads off, suggesting that they use magic to regulate the temperature instead. So they do. It is a revolutionary idea, which couldn't have possibly been conceived by the boys, who were still caught up in the absolute freedom of being dinosaurs. Fuji suggests that they buy an AC unit, but the money isn't there, and after also suggesting that they just upload Ojisan's memories to YouTube, Takafumi explains that the commenters will likely be upset about the rampant animal abuse. They brainstorm about what other spiritual tactics are plausible to solve their heat crisis. When Fujim asks what exactly the spirits are, Takafumi imagines hot women, but the reality is that they're more like collective wills of phenomena and concepts, whose voices Ojisan can hear sometimes. They begin to talk to him, which gives the youngins some heebie-jeebies and causes them to express concern for his mental health. Ojisan glazes over the subject by suddenly stating that they should buy a cow's head. It's much too expensive, but they need it as a ritualistic compensation for the cooling spell. If they don't offer a gift to the ice spirit, the entire planet will be frozen over for 10 years. This result seems a little overkill, but upon going to cook the fish, Ojisan receives a call from the frost spirit, stating that a fish head would be fine too. I guess to a spirit, living things are more or less the same, and the concept of humanity being on the brink of extinction doesn't bother Ojisan too much, so the shrine is erected. The fish looks tasty, due to them being dinosaurs for a while, and Fuji has a brief flashback. They invite her to join them someday. She refuses, then Ojisan begins to explain how if one stays transformed for too long, it's possible to never return to normal, which reminds him of the time he spent a month as the Blaze Dragon after fleeing the kingdom. He might have stayed a dragon for the rest of his life, but was returned to normal after Elf saved him. She puts up a dramatic show, monologuing briefly about how things have gotten out of hand, and glancing at her newly returned wedding band, and doing a tsundere. The battle is ferocious, but Elf is a proper fantasy warrior whose combat expertise has been honed through countless battles. Takafumi is in awe of her fight, reflecting on how Uncle's struggles are usually either get hanged or win instantly. Elf ultimately knocks Ojisan out of the air, states that he's fine as an orc, changes him back to his regular form, and gives him a little forehead kissy as a treat. Upon doing so, some pompous donut shows up to get confrontational, insisting that Elf hand over Orcface. Apparently, she owes him a considerable debt for probably taking out a loan to purchase her ring back. Elf scolds the shady merchant for his dastardly tactic, but is taunted for speaking out. They reveal her identity as an elven princess, which Takafumert and Fujifujil reflect on. The taunting continues, and Elf begins to entertain violence, but she is restrained by a special Yu-Gi-Oh card which uses a blood pact with the spirits. Elf is laid low due to the insurmountable power of the spiritual realm, and her aggressor flaunts his superiority above her, introducing himself as Hagen Regelfalgen. Ojisan busts up the legendary sealing spell in an instant though. He apologizes for being a nuisance, figures that he just returned the favor, and attempts to peace out. Hogarth Big Fart is in shock, while Ojisan attempts to wrest free from Elf's grasp, insisting that he probably smells from being a dragon for a month. Elf smelled him up while he was asleep though, and didn't encounter any problems. She accidentally admits to hugging him, but covers by stating she was attempting to strangle him instead. Oji-san immediately accepts this, and the kids reflect on the oil and water type interactions Elf and him have. Anyway, Hagen is devastated and goes feral with rage, letting Oji-san know about the debt that Elf owes. An absolute unit emerges from the sidelines to insist that he eviscerate Elf Babe, upset that he didn't get to slay a dragon. Hagen figures it's such a shame it had to come to this, but Elf prepares to put up a vehement resistance. Oji-san attempts to pay off Elf's debts with the bestowing of a cosmolite ring upon Mr. Regal Feagle's finger. This, understandably, causes Elf to unleash her Bankai, which produces a localized earthquake. Oji-san rescues her from the sudden earthen collapse, ultimately diffusing the situation entirely. Meanwhile, Hogan is in a daze from being suddenly married, finding himself unable to actually pry the ring off of his finger. He's congratulated. Then Oji-san questions Elf about her motives, which he is completely unable to understand. Uncle states candidly that Elf doesn't need precious metals to look beautiful. She's tsundere, but Oji-san deflects by calling her filthy as well. She giggles in delight. However, Uncle so ardently desires a bath. There's a hot spring nearby, so they proceed to journey, discussing Oji-san's strange obsession with cleanliness, and that's how we return to normal after temporarily metamorphosing into the Blaze Dragon. Speaking of hot springs, when it's this cold, that doesn't sound too bad. Their humble abode is actually an Arctic wonderland now, and they huddle together for warmth. Fuji insists that she just help them pay for an AC, but Oji-san's pride as a YouTuber will not allow it. She instead figures that his Sword of Darkness might help. However, Oji-san displays that it mostly just has the ability to disrupt power flows, like magic, Wi-Fi, or radio waves. In the after credits, Oji-san witnesses someone's gut-buster accident from eating a parasite-ridden fish. He barges into the women's room and immediately begins to investigate their bodies for symptoms of being infected. Elf isn't so sure about all this, but Mabel seems to not mind. Suddenly, Oji-san is brutally exploded by a fish parasite. I guess they were going to have a pescatarian lunch. They have pizza instead. Fujimiya's homie, Sawa, arrives at Takafumi's apartment complex, intent on saving her from his dastardly clutches, but runs into Chiyaka, whose imposing size and menacing visage inspire immediate fear. Tako arrives to add to the compounding terror, as the array of misunderstandings tilts towards the infinite. Nevertheless, Sawa continues on, finding her friend totally unaffected. Oji-san is away, thankfully, and the grim fish head altar is observed, inciting more dread. Takafuji Mifumi discusses the strategy should Uncle reveal his magical powers, but Sabert overhears, breaking the seal on her mental fortitude and inspiring her immediate retreat. Unfortunately, Oji-san arrives at that very moment. With a sly grimace, it has a negative impact. He attempts another, but this yields much the same. Sawa pleads to spare Fuji from this cult-like madness, but is misunderstood and given SEGA wisdom instead. Fujimiya defends Oji-san, which immediately causes Sawwoman to question her true motives for hanging around. Fungimito becomes a tomato briefly and glances at Takafumi, which tells Sawa all she needs to know. She proceeds to test his character by showing pictures of Fuji, which T-Dog instantly analyzes. Enhance. Who is this fella, 20 miles behind Fujert's gargantuan honkers? Sawa offers up another photo, which garners the same result, then asks about what Fishy was like in the past. She used to be a bit like modern-day Chiaki, who surprises Sawa with his oppressive vibe. Fuji conducts an experiment by suddenly shoving Sawan into Takafumi, determining that he is in fact interested in women. She catches him ogling the beach pick, which causes him to self-flagellate. Thankfully, Oji-san uses the opportunity to unveil his magical abilities to show Sawa exactly what Fuji looked like. This isn't ideal, so the youths team up to save their loved ones from Oji-san's memory wiping spell. This reminds him of the time when he was scolded for erasing memories during the hot springs trip, and they get to viewing. It's just Oji-san grunting for 20 minutes. Back in time, sort of. Oji-san accidentally flirts with Elf on the way to the hot spring, which they find is of Japanese origin. The person who founded this onsen was a transfer, just like Oji-san, but was so old that he died shortly after. Elf and the owner of the inn discuss how the transfer died, Jedi style, evaporating into thin air, and the properties of his god-given powers. Oji-san organizes his inventory during the important conversation, after which Oji-san terrifies the innkeeper's family with his face, begging the question of why he is so gruff. rough with the people of this world. He states that civility only comes after you're seen as a person, which is fair, and he gets back to the bathing sequence. They skip through to Elf and Ojisan discussing Japanese clothing while they approach their room. Ojisan isn't so sure about sharing, but is reassured. There is sexual tension, which Ojisan doesn't notice. The little girl also doesn't notice, attempts to relocate them, and receives the Sunderay's wrath. Elf is elated by the tatami, flopping down with delight. Ojisan, however, simply drags his bedding away into a closet to sleep separately. This does not please Elf, but she is used to this by now. Suddenly, Ojisan approaches from her blind spot and engages in an erotic massage. This surprises Elf, and she engages Sunderay mode. It is ineffective, and Ojisan doubles down on his forceful masseuring. Elf becomes aggressive, tickling Ojisan into submission. This causes more sexual tension. Fujimiya prays to the spirits to continue this lascivious scene. However, there's a curious voyeur named Alicia. Elf releases a powerful haki, which would incapacitate a normal being. Alicia was curious about Orcface's relationship with Elf, who inquires about this as well. Alicia whispers the correct sequence of words, which pleases Elf, while Ojisan is handed his cut of the reward for slaying the hedgehog, and given the advice not to trust others so casually. Meanwhile, Albert and Elf discuss her marriage to Ojisan, which swiftly moves on to Alicia's romances, of which she is rejected instantly. Fuji reflects on this. The heroes' party was in the area to train, mentioning their lack of strength regarding the labyrinth where they acquired the legendary Wand of Salvation. Elf is shook. Alopecia painted it to look cute. This kills the elf. Ojisan is interested in the lad's special moves and conjures a memory of their training. Unfortunately, Elf spots the glimmer of an ancient relic being used as a towel rack and decides to do a magical girl transformation to assert her dominance as a collector of such artifacts. She immediately goes to collect the towel rack, leaving Ojisan in Alicia's hands, who isn't so sure about letting her go alone. It's all good though, and they discuss how the inn is protected from monsters. Or, at least, it should be. However, it is currently on fire. Ojisan is shook. This gross sloth gorilla creature, a hypno beast, got the little girl to open the door. Unfortunately, Ojisan's magical powers are ineffective due to the anti-magic birds flying overhead. Uncle has no other choice but to rely on his physical stats, and struggles to do so while the hero's manslaves steel themselves for battle by using Ojisan's power as inspiration. Takafumi brings this up, which comes as a pleasant surprise to Ojisan. However, upon further viewing, they were talking about some other guy. Ojisan is crushed and goes to sulk. The heroes briefly reflect on Orcface's power too, allowing redemption to happen, but it's too late as Ojisan is mid-breakdown already. Without magic, Ojisan must rely on his Pokemon cards to summon magical spells, swiftly launching into the air, exploding a bird, and making a hard landing, preparing himself to do battle with the remaining seagull. Elf shows up just in time with a massive laser blast from the towel rack from earlier. They're shook. She sunderays to get Orcface to look in her direction, but fails. The kids ask about the weird birds, which Ojisan explains release a demonic breath that suppresses spiritual activity. It's more like the spirits just don't like the smell and stay away, so Ojisan still doesn't have his powers back. The hypno beast torments Alicia with the zombified husks of her friends. It claps in delight at the scene which it has wrought. Orcface joins in on the slow chase, inquiring about Alicia's magic in regards to releasing them from the mind control. She can't do that while in this situation, but Ojisan figures that her wand might have something that could help, and uses it to activate a barrier of light, trapping them and their pursuers. It's a good chance to undo the hypnosis, but Alicia has been topped by a cool wizard and doesn't have the calmness of mind to conduct her dispel. Ojisan accidentally makes things worse, which the youths reflect on. Alicia meditates slightly, then proceeds to cast her magics, freeing the homies, and upon celebrating, receives the ire of the hypno beast. She instantly obliterates that freak in one punch though. It seems like she doesn't know what happened, but Uncle explains that her wand imbued her with the power to transfer the abilities of her companions onto herself. Upon fleeing the scene, the beast allows a pack of ravenous hot dogs into the onsen, but luckily, the demonic breath has finally dispersed, permitting Ojisan to harness the strength of the spirits of water residing within, converting the horde of wild animals into a wonderful firework display. And that's that solved, probably. Unfortunately, the inn has been roughed up, but at least everyone is safe. Ojisan is thanked by the little girl as he patches things up, up. The barrier he erects rivals the legendary barrier around Luvaldrum and gives the proprietor a heroic dosage of peace of mind. Wait, but the actual story was about someone being angry at Ojisan for erasing their memories. After a brief hot spring dip, Alicia decides to show up, essentially nude, then catches her scant clothing on a piece of debris, becoming partially exposed. Uncle, swift as an arrow, casts his erase spell. Alicia apologizes, but Ojisan literally doesn't remember what happened. She figures he isn't interested in such a young girl, but Ojisan mentions that he is the same age as her. In fact, she confirms that he's actually younger by a couple of months, then has an existential crisis. Alicia states that she doesn't have any memories before she was 9 years old, so her known date of birth might be skewed. She crawls closer, wanting to view the memory of her awakening. 11 years ago, she regained consciousness after the carriage bearing her was attacked by goblins. Al was brought to a local village, whose warriors slew the goblins, her only possessions being a crumpled piece of paper, and the thought that her family was probably killed, and that's why she tries to cherish what memories she can. Out of guilt, Ojisan reveals that he erased her memories twice already. This causes her to go into a frenzy and ask what memories were purged. Ojisan answers, reminding her of what happened, and filling in the important details about her promotion to hero. She responds bitterly that all the accolades she received were meant to be Ojisan's, insisting that his heroics are befitting of the legendary hero, especially due to the Luvaldrum incident. Ojisan figures that it's okay if she reveals the truth, stating that he broke the barrier in an attempt to distort space-time so he could return to his world through the resulting effect. Alicia asks if there were any other times he erased her memories, passionately forbidding him from using the spell, and so Ojisan promises not to use memory erasing magic on Alicia or erase his own memories of her. She headbutts him intently, as they promise, then celebrates briefly afterwards. Alicia realizes why he casted so hurriedly earlier, invoking Ojisan's fervent desire to uphold the promise. He insists that the memory be replicated without actually knowing what it was to begin with. Albert tells him to close his eyeballs and begins to willingly undress. Elf is watching though, and unleashes a barrage of laser fire through the legendary barrier, causing Ojisan to flee. Alicia is smitten though. Back in the present, Ojisan surmises his trip as the hot springs of hell. While the youths ponder his galactic level density, they figure his brain must be mushy peas due to the constant wiping, insisting that he tone it down some. Ojisan contends that he mostly uses a technique to kill sensitivity instead, stating that if you remain apathetic, then you can't be damaged. Takafumi gives it a go, finding the methodology to be adequate, but Fuji isn't so sure about the implementation. The happy family discuss the non-existence of boomboxes when Oji-san is reminded of something called the singing monster, and so they begin the viewing. Oji-san was given a quest to slay this monster and encountered it in the woods, singing a melancholic tone. Upon charging into battle, he suddenly realizes that it's Mabel. She is slightly embarrassed to be caught, but Oji-san is more concerned about her being alone in the woods. This is fine though, because her cloak allows her to turn into a dog. Despite this, she used to have a good gig in the capital, but as we know, was fired. Oji-san isn't aware of this, so Mabel states plainly that it wasn't for her. The youths reflect on her narcissism, in spite of her clearly being homeless. Marlborough put up that spooky ice sculpture to keep people away, intent on staying forever, in which case, Oji-san must slay the beast which he was contracted to be rid of, threatening Mabel into submission. Oji-san insists that Mabel sell her ring in light of her newly found parapeticism. However, she ardently refuses. Instead, he suggests that she become a wandering bard, which flusters the marble. Singing in front of others isn't something she normally does, but it's a shame, because in Japan, she'd make an excellent idol. The promise of riches excites her, but Oji-san is now only thinking how to return to his world. After a brief pause, Mabel offers to sing for him the songs of his homeland to cheer him up. After a fair bit of practice and a fast forward, Mabel belts out a beautiful 8-bit melody from Oji-san's childhood. Her dulcet tones utterly incapacitate him, and she continues with a more appropriately lyrical SEGA-related song. Some goons show up to capture Oji-san while he is in a weakened state, revealing that Mabel was being used as bait to lure him in. However, Elf was watching from the sidelines, and his peace is maintained. The youths are shook. Oji-san is thankful, but Elf looks like she's about to destroy the planet. Anyway, Uncle loves video game music and plays some more tunes via his memories. This is mildly depressing. He goes to investigate a manual for the game Dynamite Heady, finding that the main character's name is different from what he thought. This is apparently devastating, so much so that it interferes with his recording session. Later, Ojisan fervently studies the names of various video game characters, justifying his obsession by stating that Elf said names were important. The day Mabel sang for him, Elf gave him her real name. She goes on a tirade, upset that Orcface has been flirting with other women. Ojisan, of course, doesn't realize that this is the case, and also becomes upset. They engage in a heated exchange of verbal abuse. It's quite romantic. Suddenly, Ojisan states his real name, Shibazaki Yousuke. Elf is shook. She immediately becomes curious, so he writes out the kanji and explains the etymology. Elf reflects on the significance of the situation, questioning why he told her his real name. He didn't think it was important, but she begs to differ, responding in kind with her name, Elga. He is unable to pronounce this, and figures that Sui will do just fine. Elf isn't okay with the shortening, calling it disgraceful for royalty. However, Ojisan retorts by stating that the etymology of Sui refers to the green gemstone, jade, analogous to the color of her eyes. Sui is flustered, and sunderes furiously, almost undoing the bestowing of her nickname. She is overcome with joy though, and the name sticks. Mabel arrives just in time to be patted on the head and asks what they're doing here. Ojisan wanted to have a peek in some nearby ruins, finding it to be the shrine of Jato, one of 3, which only the foreign warrior of legend can enter to take on their trials. Apparently, if all 3 are destroyed, a great calamity will be unleashed upon the world. They immediately realize that Ojisan might be this foreign warrior from the song, and he obliterates the shrine, summoning some kind of blue blob beast called the Great Raging Power of God. The battle begins immediately with Ojisan wielding his spiritual swords like a Chad. Takafumi interrupts to question why he just awakened such a threatening monster, but Jisan just felt like defeating it might help him get back to Japan. Wait. If there were 3 shrines, why did the creature rouse? The spirit of memory helpfully shows them the times when Ojisan accidentally obliterated the other shrines, so they continue the viewing. Ojisan's magic has no effect, meaning that the beast has no physical body. As a lump of holy magic, its crazy aura resurrects the local deceased wildlife, who are exploded by the girls. Their attacks are also ineffective though. Ojisan goes to fight up close, but is mind-controlled in an instant, sending a phoenix of flame towards the ladies. Mabel thankfully deflects his barrage with the god-freezing sword, buying time for the hero's party to somehow show up at the perfect moment. They think it's the singing monster and have arrived to slay it. All 3 of Ojisan's babes have congealed, but now isn't the time for greetings, and Elf relays the situation. Alicia is determined to wrest Orcface free from the mind control, entering his memories and revealing the darkness inside of him. This almost incapacitates Alicia, but her actions partially release the magic upon him, probably. Ojisan is pitied for having such a sad childhood, as he forcefully undoes the rest of the mind control, before suddenly retrieving the bottled blaze dragon and combining it with the god beast. It transforms into the most powerful being this world has ever known, giving the ethereal, holy magic a physical form that can be damaged. This is all according to plan. The homies are shook. Alicia expresses concern over the fact that the beast already had an insta-mind control aura and total annihilation attacks. Ojisan comes to terms with the situation, realizing that he hadn't really thought it through. They have the legendary god-freezing sword on their side though, so it should be fine. However, Mabel is nervous and quakes in fear. Elf believes in them, however. If they can outpace the dragon's healing and overwhelm it with sheer firepower, they'll stand a chance. Ojisan's stupidly strong whiz-biz and Elf's ancient artifacts should be able to handle the challenge. The mind control will be negated by Elf's cool hat, and they don't need to worry about the damage immunity because both Ojisan and Elf have discovered that the blaze dragon is vulnerable when it uses its breath attack. They never needed the god-freezing sword to begin with. Alicia calls Ojisan to the side to tell him that she's been keeping the secrets they shared in the bath. Ojisan inquires about the memory he erased again, insisting that the event be recreated, but this doesn't happen. Maybe later though. Anyway, Mabel is introduced to the hero's party and does her own introduction. She is elated, then does a humble brag to kill the vibe. Suddenly, the fight begins with Elf wishing to be held. She must store up power, so Ojisan has to fly her around. He doesn't seem to like the idea and chains her up instead. Elf is disappointed. Mabel is overjoyed due to not having a job to do and runs off, but finds that the dragon especially loathes the ice plan. Ojisan figures she'll make great bait, and away she goes. Alicia explodes a rock like a Chad, saving Mabel from certain death. Keith, or what's his name, is peeved at his move being stolen, but the baiting is being done masterfully. Elf is nervous, despite playing up their chances of winning. She didn't want the kids to suffer the humiliation of defeat, and made the move to inspire hope instead. They stare at each other for a while, reflecting on the past for inspiration. A pinch is a chance, after all. Tension is built. Takafumi takes the moment to prepare himself for a bona fide fantasy battle by making coffee, taking a little pee-pee break, and gathering some snacks. They begin the offensive, taking the first breath attack head-on, deflecting with Ojisan's magic, and ready to bait the claw attack. Elf is launched into the air to do just that, allowing Mabel to ensnare the dragon with her chilly tentacles. Ojisan charges up a potent lightning attack to boost Elf's firepower, leading to a devastating clash of energy. Elf turns on her Bankai, activating a super long star breaker, slashing the big dragon in twain, and dissipating its corporeality into the wind. She stands in the sky for a bit, then begins to fall. Ojisan notices and catches her before she can lose consciousness. It was a cheeky bait to get him to hold her though. They romantically plummet to the ground as Elf wells tears of joy. Ojisan holds Elf in his arms and they look into each other's eyes, probably. It's quite romantic. However, Elf smells lightly fried and begins to flail, causing them to sustain a rather hard landing. Ojisan takes the opportunity to slurp up the divine beast into his bottle for later. The party rendezvous upon the surface. Marbles wishes for praise, and so Ojisan earnestly gives everyone a humble thanks with a bow. Navel is teased by Alicia, who is in turn teased back with Mabel suggesting that Ojisan take her for a fly through the skies as well. So he does. The boys want to have a go too, while Elf steams furiously. Ojisan thanks Mabel for the time they spent together last night, implying a few things, and bestowing a second cosmolite ring upon her finger. Elf begins to feel a feeling, while the other girls bring up Ojisan's aliases, causing him to immediately state his real name. This kills the elf, but the ladies think his aliases are much cooler. Elf Sunderays, almost unleashing the calamity of the great raging power of God, which causes Ojisan to state that he saw a warp in space-time when the creature was slain, the very thing he was looking for. If he can make it stronger somehow, then hit it with a more powerful attack. Returning to Japan might be possible. Elf attempts to destroy it. The youths reflect on the power of Tsundere. Fujimiya endeavors to hurry the plotline up to get to the point where Ojisan returns to Japan, but is fervently impeded by Tacos, who understands mythos. Ojisan insists that the story won't take too long, because he mostly just spends his time alone. Since the main story for the season is over now, they go ahead and get some ramen. Here is a pleasant callback, and another, then a brief recap of events. Upon returning home, the spirit of memory begins to act up, displaying something shocking. Ojisan was suddenly thrown in jail, and must start over from ground zero. In the after credits, there are a few zesty drawings, and that's the end of Season 1 of Isekai Ojisan. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm desperately hoping this gets another season, and hoping that many others think so too. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, and all that to help the video worm around. I've got a Patreon, should you feel the need to support my dumb videos. Thanks again. Bye.